I thought I'd seen everything as a nurse, but the night I found that photograph in my patient's drawer, I realized I didn't even know who he really was. Because that picture showed a family that wasn't supposed to exist. When you've spent years working in patient homes, you start believing nothing can surprise you anymore. I've seen the fragile balance between life and death, love and loss, the whispered confessions of people too weak to carry their secrets any longer. But that was before Mr. Whitmore. He was 78, frail but proud, a retired architect with a smile that carried a strange calm, the kind that makes you think he's made peace with everything. When I first met him, he lived alone in a sprawling old house that felt stuck in time. The hallways smelled faintly of cedar and old books, and the walls were lined with architectural blueprints, the echoes of a man who once built dreams for others but now lived among ghosts of his own. My job was simple: daily checkups, medication management, light meals, and companionship. But from the first week, something about him felt incomplete. He had a family photo on the mantel, a younger man, a woman, and a small boy. He said it was his son, daughter-in-law, and grandson. But the way he said it, like he was rehearsing, didn't sound like truth. Still, I didn't pry. Not yet. Every day at 5 p.m., like clockwork, Mr. Whitmore would sit by the window, staring at the street with a strange expectancy. Sometimes, I'd see him straighten his collar or fix his hair, as if waiting for someone. But no one ever came. Until the night that changed everything. It was late, around 10:30 p.m., when he called for me. His voice, usually steady, sounded weak and trembling. I rushed to his room. "Eleanor," he whispered. I dropped my glasses. "Could you find them?" They weren't on his nightstand, nor under the bed. As I bent to check the floor, my knee brushed against something lodged deep under the dresser, a small wooden drawer I hadn't noticed before. It didn't fit the furniture. It was old, uneven, handmade. When I slid it open, it let out a faint creak, and inside, beneath a few yellowed letters and an old rosary, was a black and white photograph. A man, younger Mr. Whitmore, smiling beside a woman I'd never seen before. 2 children, a boy and a girl, stood beside them, holding his hands. The background wasn't this house. It was a small white cottage, somewhere rural, maybe decades ago. But the most chilling part? On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink. "Our real family, 1972. I froze. "Mr. Whitmore, who are these people?" I asked softly, holding the photo up. He looked at it, and for the first time since I met him, fear crossed his face. Not confusion, fear. "Put that back," he said quietly. His voice wasn't frail anymore. It was sharp, commanding. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "Please," he interrupted, softer now. "Just put it back where you found it. Some things shouldn't be disturbed." There was a silence between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I slipped the photo back into the drawer, but my hands trembled. When I left his room, I could still feel his eyes following me, not angry, but pleading. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tried telling myself it wasn't my business. But nurses develop instincts, emotional sonar, I call it. When something's wrong, you feel it in the air. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. Smiling, polite, even cheerful. He asked for pancakes. Told me stories about his son, Mark, how they used to go fishing, how proud he was of him. But there was something rehearsed about it all, like a script he'd memorized. I noticed more oddities. His mail never came addressed to Mr. Whitmore, it came to Harold Finch. His medications had initials that didn't match his records. And one evening, when I was cleaning the kitchen, I found a set of keys taped under a drawer, each labeled with tiny pieces of paper. One said garage, another basement, and one that made me shiver, cottage. I asked him casually, "Mr. Whitmore, have you ever lived in the countryside?" He smiled faintly. "Once. A long time ago. But that house doesn't exist anymore." The following week, his health started to decline. He had episodes of confusion, mistaking me for someone named Clara. When I gently corrected him, he'd mumble, "Clara always loved the lilacs, she said the smell meant home." I didn't know who Clara was. But when I checked his personal documents later, I found no mention of anyone by that name. Not in his family, not in his medical records. One evening, as I was adjusting his medication tray, he looked at me with startling clarity. "Eleanor," he said, "have you ever done something you can't undo?" I hesitated. "I think everyone has something they wish they could take back." He smiled sadly. "Yes. But some mistakes don't stay buried. Sometimes, they send letters, and find their way back to your door." That night, when he was asleep, I heard the sound of his bedroom phone ringing, the old landline on his nightstand. He answered it in a whisper. I could hear only fragments through the hallway. "You shouldn't call here anymore." "No, not after all this time." "You don't understand, they think I'm someone else now." Then silence. The next morning, he was pale and distant. Barely spoke. When I asked if he was all right, he said only one thing. "Eleanor, if anything happens to me, don't let them open the basement." I laughed nervously, thinking it was another one of his confused moments. But his eyes, glassy and terrified, told me he was dead serious. That night, I couldn't resist. After he went to bed, I took the small silver key labeled basement. My hands were shaking as I walked down the narrow stairs. The air was cold, thick with dust and something faintly metallic. At first, I saw only old furniture, a workbench, and stacks of boxes. But then, something caught my eye. On the far wall, under a sheet of plastic, were several picture frames. I lifted the cover. Each frame held a photograph of Mr. Whitmore with the same woman and children from that secret drawer, growing older across the years. In one photo, the children looked like teenagers. In another, adults with their own families. And in the final one, the woman stood alone, wearing black. The date written at the bottom, funeral, 1996. My breath caught. Who had died? One of the children? Or Mr. Whitmore himself? Because in that photo, his coffin was open. And inside it, was him. I stumbled backward, knocking over a box. Something small rolled out, a tarnished wedding ring, engraved inside with the words, "Clara and Harold, forever." Harold. Harold Finch. The name from his mail. Which meant, my patient, Mr. Whitmore, wasn't who he said he was. I barely slept that night. The pieces didn't make sense, a fake name, two families, a hidden past, and a grave with his own face in it. The next morning, when I went to his room, the bed was empty. The window was open. And on his nightstand was the old photograph, the one from the drawer. But now, there was something new written across the back in shaky handwriting. The night my patient vanished, I thought it was over. But the next morning, a letter arrived at the doorstep, addressed not to me, not to Mr. Whitmore, but to the man who was supposed to be dead. The police called it a missing person case. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because people don't just disappear into thin air after leaving a confession on their nightstand. Especially not men who've been living under someone else's name. The morning after he vanished, I walked into that house and it felt like the air had changed, like the walls themselves knew something I didn't. His breakfast plate was still on the table. His slippers were neatly by the bed. But the photograph, the one of his real family, was gone. Only the ring remained. That gold wedding ring, engraved with Clara and Harold, forever. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it. There was no pulse of fear now, just a cold curiosity sinking into my chest. Who was Harold Finch, really? And why had he faked an entire identity? Then the doorbell rang. It startled me so badly I almost dropped the ring. When I opened the door, a middle-aged woman stood there, holding an envelope. Her face looked strangely familiar. "Is Harold home?" she asked softly. I froze. "Do you mean Mr. Whitmore?" Her expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That's what he's calling himself now. Before I could respond, she stepped closer, pressing the envelope into my hands. Give this to him if he ever comes back, she whispered. And tell him Clara forgave him a long time ago. Before I could even ask her name, she was gone. The envelope was thick and slightly torn at the edges. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several old letters, some decades old, and one more recent, dated just a month ago. The newest one read, Dear Harold, I know you changed your name. I know why you left. But it's been 50 years. The children are grown now, and the truth doesn't hurt anymore. If you're still alive, please, come home. Clara still thinks of you every day. Ruth. Ruth. That name didn't appear anywhere in his medical or family records. But Clara, that name, I'd heard before. He'd whispered it in his sleep. So who was Ruth? And what did she mean by you changed your name? I drove straight to the local records office. As a home nurse, I wasn't supposed to dig into personal information, but this was beyond work. It felt like a haunting I couldn't escape. After some persistence, and maybe a few family fibs, I found the file. Harold Finch, born 1944. Declared dead, 1996. My throat went dry. That was the same year as the photograph I found, the funeral photo. But here's where it got worse. A man named Daniel Whitmore, the same name as my patient, had appeared in city records 2 years after Harold's death, living in a house purchased with cash. No next of kin listed. No occupation. It was him. He'd literally buried his old self, and started over. When I got back to the house, I felt eyes on me. The curtains in the living room were slightly open, and I swear, I saw movement inside. My heart pounded as I stepped in, calling softly. Mr. Whitmore, Harold? No answer. The air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, something he never allowed in the house. And on the kitchen counter, there was a coffee mug, still warm. I picked it up with shaking hands. Then I heard the faintest sound, a floorboard creaking above me. I looked up. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing in the hallway upstairs. I grabbed my phone flashlight and climbed the stairs one at a time. Mr. Whitmore, if that's you, please answer me. Silence. When I reached his bedroom, the door was half open. Inside, the curtains billowed from the night breeze. The bed was made, the sheets untouched, but the drawer, the one with the secret photograph, was gone. Completely removed. And on the wall, scrawled in shaky handwriting. You shouldn't have gone to the basement. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I called the police immediately. They searched the house, every room, every corner. But they found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. No fingerprints, except mine. When I mentioned the missing drawer, the photographs, and the letters, the officer gave me a skeptical look. Ma'am, he said, this house's basement hasn't been opened in years. The lock was rusted shut. Are you sure you weren't dreaming? I knew what I'd seen. But the thing about secrets is, once you dig them up, they start digging back. For the next few days, I couldn't get that name, Clara, out of my head. I reread the letters, the ink faded and fragile. Each one told the story of a man torn between two worlds. One with Clara, the woman he'd married young, poor, and hopeful. And another with Ruth, the woman he met later, when he had money, success, and guilt. He had 2 families. He'd been living one life while secretly funding another. But at some point, everything must have fallen apart. One of the letters hinted at it. You can't just disappear, Harold. The children deserve the truth. They deserve to know why their father never came home. So that's what he'd done, disappeared. Buried Harold Finch. Became Daniel Whitmore. And carried the weight of that lie for nearly 30 years. 3 nights later, I was finishing my notes at the kitchen table when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Then, from the hallway, that same creaking sound again. I froze. "Mr. Whitmore?" I whispered. "Nothing." I reached for my phone flashlight again and shined it down the hallway. At the end, I saw a shadow, tall, unmoving, like someone standing just beyond the light's reach. My breath hitched. "Who's there?" The figure turned slowly, and for a split second, I saw his face. Pale. Hollow. Familiar. It was him. Mr. Whitmore. Or Harold. Or whoever he really was. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then he raised a shaking hand and pointed toward the back door. When I blinked, he was gone. I followed where he'd pointed, my pulse thundering in my ears. Outside, the garden stretched into the dark woods. And there, by the old oak tree, something glinted under the moonlight. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was a small tin box, old, rusted, sealed tight. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were several photographs, and a small folded note. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't run anymore. The truth is buried here, just like she is. Please, tell them I tried to make it right." Beneath the note was another ring, smaller, delicate. A woman's wedding band. And when I turned it over, my stomach dropped. It was engraved. "Clara and Harold, forever." That's when I realized there were 2 rings. One in the house. One buried outside. And both belonged to Clara. I backed away, shaking, the box still in my hands. And that's when I heard a faint voice from behind me, hoarse, trembling, almost familiar. "You shouldn't have opened it." I spun around, but the yard was empty. Only the shadows moved. And somewhere deep in the woods, I swear I heard someone sobbing. I left that house before sunrise. I told the agency I couldn't work there anymore. But even now, weeks later, I keep thinking about that night. About the photo, the letters, the voices. And about the truth buried in that garden, whoever she really was. They say houses don't keep secrets, but this one did. Because when we dug up the garden behind Mr. Whitmore's home, what we found didn't just rewrite his story, it changed everything I thought I knew about him, and myself. The night I found the buried box, I didn't sleep. Every creak of my apartment walls sounded like that house calling me back, whispering things I didn't want to hear. By morning, I'd made a decision, I was going back. But this time, not alone. Detective Alan Pierce from the local precinct met me outside the property. A calm, tired man in his 50s with that look of quiet skepticism cops get when they've seen too many strange things. "So, Nurse Eleanor," he said, flipping open his notebook. "You're saying your patient, Daniel Whitmore, might not be who he says he is?" I nodded. "He's been living under a different name for decades. I found letters, old photographs, a wedding ring, and a box buried out back. I think someone else is buried there too." He gave me that look, the kind halfway between disbelief and concern. "Miss, you do realize how this sounds?" "I know," I said softly. "But please. Just dig." The house felt even heavier than before. The curtains still moved with the faint draft, the smell of old furniture clinging to the air. As we walked through the hall, my eyes caught something new, the photo frames on the wall had been rearranged. Every picture now faced backward. The detective noticed too. "You did this?" I shook my head. "No. They were normal last week." He frowned, jotting something in his book. "Creepy." We went out back to the garden. The morning light was dim, gray clouds hovering low like a storm waiting to happen. I pointed to the spot under the old oak tree. "Right there. That's where I found the box." The detective's assistant brought out small tools and began digging carefully. The first few inches were just soil and roots, nothing unusual. But then, the shovel hit something solid. A wooden sound. Hollow. We both knelt down. The officer brushed away the dirt, revealing what looked like the edge of an old wooden board. "Step back," Pierce said. With a few more strikes, the wood gave way, revealing a small, sunken space beneath. And inside, a bundle wrapped in plastic. I covered my mouth, the world spinning slightly. Pierce crouched and peeled the corner of the plastic away. Inside was bone. Human bone. A skull. And next to it, a faded photograph, sealed in a glass frame. It was him. Mr. Whitmore. But younger, standing with a smiling woman and two small children. Clara and the kids. Pierce exhaled slowly. Well, nurse, looks like you were right. They called in forensics, taped off the whole area, and began collecting evidence. I sat on the porch steps, shaking. Everything around me felt unreal, like I was watching a movie through fogged glass. Pierce walked over after a while. So, he said, flipping through his notes, you said you last saw your patient 2 nights ago? Yes. And before he vanished, he confessed something about having another family? He didn't say it outright, I replied. He said he lied for too long. That he had to make it right before the end. Pierce nodded thoughtfully. He's probably still alive. But if that body is who I think it is, he's been hiding more than just guilt. That night, I went home exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Every image replayed, the ring, the letters, the voice whispering you shouldn't have opened it. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window, staring at the rain outside. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? For a moment, there was only static. Then a man's voice, hoarse, trembling. You shouldn't have brought them there. I froze. Who is this? Eleanor, please. Stop digging. You don't understand what you've done. The line went dead. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I checked the call log, no number, no trace. It wasn't possible. But the voice, I knew it. It was him. Mr. Whitmore. The next morning, I went to the hospital records office, determined to find anything about his past treatments. I needed answers. The receptionist, an older nurse named Marie, recognized his name right away. Oh, Daniel Whitmore, she said softly. He came here years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years back. Quiet man. Always paid cash. Said he didn't want insurance records. Did he ever mention family? She frowned. Just once. Said his wife was gone. Poor thing, he seemed broken about it. But there was something else. She lowered her voice. He wasn't using his real name then, either. Later that day, Detective Pierce called me back to the property. They'd identified the remains. The body buried in the garden wasn't Clara Finch. It was Ruth. The second woman. My heart dropped. Pierce looked at me grimly. So either Clara's alive somewhere, or Harold Finch killed both his wives and buried one under his garden. I shook my head, horrified. No, you don't understand. He didn't seem capable of. Eleanor, he interrupted softly, every killer seems normal until they're not. That night, sleep refused to come again. I sat in bed, reading the old letters by lamplight, trying to piece together the timeline. The words blurred together, guilt, forgiveness, redemption. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. One of the envelopes, the oldest one, wasn't sealed. Inside, folded tight, was a torn piece of map. The address wasn't for the house I knew. It was for a motel 2 towns over. And scribbled beside it, in shaky handwriting. Tell Clara the truth. I didn't wait for morning. I grabbed my keys and drove through the night rain, the wipers smearing streaks of light across the windshield. The motel sat on the outskirts of a quiet highway, half its neon sign flickering out. I asked the clerk if anyone named Daniel Whitmore or Harold Finch had stayed there. He frowned. Nobody by those names. But we had a guy check in last week under Henry Wallace. Quiet old man. Room 12. I felt my stomach twist. Room 12. I walked down the damp hallway, the carpet muffled under my shoes. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. I knocked softly. "Mr. Whitmore, it's Eleanor." No sound. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. But then, faintly, from inside, came the sound of breathing. Slow. Uneven. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering TV on static. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was him. Pale. Fragile. A shadow of the man I'd cared for. "Eleanor," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to find her." I swallowed hard. "You killed Ruth, didn't you?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I tried to save her." "Save her?" I echoed, trembling. "From what?" He looked up at me, eyes hollow but sharp. "From Clara." The words hit me like ice. My mind scrambled, trying to process what he'd just said. "Clara's dead, Harold." He smiled faintly. "Is she?" And before I could respond, the lights flickered, and somewhere outside, a woman's laughter echoed faintly through the rain. When you're a nurse, you learn that truth has a pulse, you just need to know where to feel for it. And that night, truth came knocking, or rather, screaming. I was doing my evening rounds when I heard the sound, a sharp, guttural cry coming from Mr. Lawson's room. My heart lurched. I dropped my clipboard and rushed in. He was on the floor. His oxygen tube had slipped. His hands were shaking violently, one clutching his chest, the other reaching towards something, a photograph lying face down beside him. I lunged forward, grabbed the oxygen tube, and reconnected it. "Mr. Lawson. Stay with me," I shouted, pressing the emergency button. Within moments, the crash team arrived. We got him back into bed, stabilized his breathing, and as his pulse steadied, he clutched my wrist with surprising strength. "Jenny, she can't find out," he whispered, his eyes wide with panic. I froze. "Who, Mr. Lawson?" He coughed, gasping. "My other family, don't tell." "Margaret," his voice trailed off as his eyes fluttered. And just like that, he slipped into unconsciousness. Later that night, after the chaos settled, I found myself staring at that same photograph I'd seen beside him. It had slid under his bed during the commotion. When I pulled it out and turned it over, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a photo of Margaret, his wife everyone knew. It was of a different woman, younger, smiling, standing beside two teenage boys who had Mr. Lawson's same unmistakable gray eyes. I whispered, "Oh my God, he wasn't lying." The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My conscience screamed one thing, "Stay out of it, Jenny." But my heart whispered another, "The man is dying, and he's scared for a reason." So, I did something I wasn't supposed to. I checked his old emergency contacts, buried deep in his admission file. And there it was, a name that wasn't Margaret. Elaine Parker, next of kin. Same address format as Margaret's, but different city. Different last name. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That evening, as the rain lashed against the windows, I sat beside Mr. Lawson's bed again. His breathing was shallow, the rhythmic beep of his monitor the only sound cutting through the storm. "Mr. Lawson," I said softly, "I know about Elaine." His eyes opened slowly, and for the first time, he didn't look surprised, just tired. "You found the photo," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Yes," I said quietly. "Who are they?" He stared at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking. "My first family," he said finally. "I left them. I told Margaret I was widowed, but Elaine was still alive. I thought I could live two lives. Until, the truth became too heavy." His voice cracked. "The boys grew up hating me. Elaine stopped answering my calls. And now, Margaret doesn't even know they exist." I swallowed hard. "Why hide it still? You're running out of time." He looked at me, tears pooling in his eyes. Because I want her to remember me as a good man. Just once in my life, I want one of them to keep loving me. For a moment, the room felt unbearably small, the air thick with guilt and decades of silence. But secrets have a way of spreading, even without words. The next morning, Margaret came in early, earlier than usual. She looked pale, her lips pressed tight. "Jenny," she said, her voice trembling, I found something." My heart dropped. She pulled out the same photograph. "I was cleaning his drawer and saw this," she said. "Who are these people?" My throat went dry. I couldn't answer. Before I could speak, Mr. Lawson stirred awake. His eyes landed on Margaret, then on the photo in her hands, and he knew. Margaret's voice shook. "Who are they, Henry?" He didn't even try to lie. He just stared at her, his face pale, his eyes wet. "They're my other family." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What?" The silence that followed was unbearable. The monitors beeped softly, the storm outside raged on, and the weight of 4 decades of deception filled that room like smoke. She whispered, "All those years, all the anniversaries, the vacations, the promises, was I just your second life?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said sharply, her voice breaking. Then she turned to me, her eyes glassy but steady. "You knew, didn't you?" I found out only yesterday," I stammered. "I wasn't sure how to tell you." She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No one ever is." And she walked out, quietly, without another word. For days after that, she didn't come back. Mr. Lawson deteriorated quickly. The nurses said it was his heart, but I knew it was guilt that finally broke him. The night he died, I was by his side. His breathing was faint, but his eyes were alert, searching. "Did she come back?" he whispered. I shook my head gently. He smiled weakly. "I didn't deserve her forgiveness anyway." Then, almost inaudibly, he said, "Tell Elaine." "I'm sorry." His pulse flatlined moments later. Weeks passed. Margaret never returned to the nursing home. Elaine, the first wife, was notified. She came quietly, left flowers on his bed, and said only 3 words before leaving. He was human. And somehow, those 3 words haunted me more than all his secrets combined. Because that's what it came down to, didn't it? Humans, flawed, fragile, hiding behind love and lies, trying to hold their worlds together even when they're falling apart. When I walk past his empty room now, I sometimes imagine him sitting there, reading, smiling, pretending the world outside that door didn't exist. And I wonder, how many other patients hide entire lives in their silence? How many secrets rest in the drawers beside their hospital beds? Maybe that's why I keep telling these stories. Because behind every closed door, there's always another truth waiting to be found, and another voice waiting to speak. Soft piano music rises. This was The Man with 2 Families, one of those stories that reminds us that love and lies often share the same heartbeat. If you felt this story, if it made you think about the hidden lives we all carry, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more true inspired stories from the Silent Caretaker. Because every home holds a secret. Every heart hides a story. And here, those stories finally speak.